What would happen if you completely quit caffeine? Well, I just spent the last 819 days completely without a single coffee, energy drink, Red Bull, anything to find out exactly what would happen. So in this video, I'm going to break down exactly what happened to me over those 819 days when I quit caffeine, what the big problem is with caffeine that nobody talks about, and why you might actually have more energy than without caffeine if you quit. So I used to drink caffeine pretty much every single day. And I remember since I was probably 11 or 12 years old, how just normalized this was into, every single day culture, that it's just completely normal to just wake up, feel exhausted, grab a coffee or a cup of tea, get your day started, then, get to your 10 o'clock break, have another coffee, and just sort of repeat this cycle till, sort of early to mid afternoon. And there was this time around 2022, I was doing my master's dissertation, and it got to a point where I was drinking probably 5 or 6 cups of tea per day. Now, I was never a coffee drinker. I actually can't stand coffee. So I would drink probably 5 or 6 cups of coffee per day at this time, and also started having about 2 or 3 white monsters throughout the afternoon and through my gym session as well. And this is the worst I've ever felt, probably day to day in my life. And I'd be sat there doing these suicide shifts of about 14, 16 hour days at the desk typing away. And I remember so distinctly it get to about probably 12, 1 p.m. every single day, and my leg would just start shaking, hitting the top of the desk. Now, I never pieced together that this is because I was so, stimulated from so much coffee, and I probably already had a white monster at this point. I just thought that the stress of the actual the work, or just life in general, I'd never pieced together that drinking a lot of coffee was really bad for me. Now, I think everyone secretly knows that it's not good for your nervous system to feel so overstimulated, but I don't think anyone's quite broken down why exactly it's so bad. And if you're watching this never having quit caffeine before, I want to sort of break down exactly what life beyond caffeine could look like and how that is actually possible. Because I know if I found a video like this 2, 3 years ago when I actually quit, I would never for a second believe that you could quit coffee. And the first thing I'd be saying is, why the fuck would anyone even do that? Like, why would you put yourself through feeling like shit every single day? Now, the caveat to this is the effects is actually the opposite of what you would expect. And I'm now over probably 2.5 years without caffeine. And funnily enough, I wake up every single day now as if I'd had a double, triple espresso. And it's not because I've replaced it with some other stimulants or, some crystal meth or anything. This is just about how your body's actually naturally meant to regulate. And it got to a point where I was thinking about caffeine and I was researching a lot. And I realized that caffeine is literally just a drug. It's literally a drug that you become reliant on. And this drug, without it, is what causes you to feel like you need it again. And that is literally the definition of a drug addiction. Now, yes, there's levels between, what constitutes a fucking serious drug addiction to something that's going to actually ruin your life compared to caffeine. Like, no doubt about it. I'm not saying that the two can be compared, to a hard drug against caffeine, but the actual concept and the way it works on the brain is exactly the same as any other drug addiction. So what I'm going to do is sort of break down why caffeine is so addictive without you actually realizing that you even have an addiction. So most people will start out, having just 1 cup of coffee or tea in the morning, usually, like brought in by family, especially from a young age, being, in the old family house. And I don't think anyone will get to age 16, 18 without having some sort of regular coffee or, caffeine habit, which, as I said, could just be 1 cup in the morning, or for most people, it actually builds and you actually start to convince yourself, I like the taste of coffee, or it's something, to enjoy on a morning. But the reality is that caffeine is one of the biggest sort of drains of your natural energy. And I'm going to break down more in this video what's actually happening scientifically within the body. But what you need to know is that your energy is basically already formed from the way you live, i.e., from your sleep, from your eating habits, from your rest and recovery, and things like this, which is why we've never needed caffeine before, the last 100 years, before we became tolerant on it and introduced it into our lives. And now no one can literally even cope without a single day without having a drug inside them. As I said, this is literally the definition of an addiction to a drug. So what is the actual use case of caffeine? Well, for most people, they think that caffeine gives them energy. I feel so tired, I need some energy, I need a coffee. So you will go, get your coffee fix. This is what people even call it. They call it their coffee fix, which is sort of funny because they're actually sort of, half saying, oh, it's as if I've got a drug addiction, but they actually do have a drug addiction. And the reliance on this drug is something that, it goes beyond any other drug on the planet, beyond alcohol, beyond weed, beyond prescription drugs, or, literally anything. I'd say it's as close to food, as anything. It's, people would think that it's almost a nutrient, it's get my water, get my food, get my fucking caffeine. But there is no nutritional benefit or value in caffeine. It is literally just a drug. It's just a stimulant. And the way it works is it doesn't actually give your body anything. It actually just takes away from your natural abilities and it's basically taking from tomorrow for today. So how does caffeine actually work in the body? Well, without getting too into the weeds of the science, your body produces something called adenosine triphosphate, ATP. You might have heard of this. This is literally your entire energy system of your body. So your body will create ATP through sleep and through rest. And this is literally how your body even functions. And then what you have left over from this is the adenosine. So basically the molecules break down and you have a waste product that just leaves what's called adenosine. Now, adenosine on its own in the body will actually start to do the opposite effect. And when that adenosine circulates in your body, this is what tells you you're fatigued. It says when you're tired. Now, what caffeine is, it's an adenosine blocker. So this blocks the receptors of adenosine. So your body will not be getting any more energized. It will be exactly the same in this, in a fatigue depleted state. But you bring in caffeine and it tricks your mind into thinking that you aren't tired. So what this means is if you imagine that you've got like a battery that's just going down and you get down to 20%, caffeine doesn't, bounce you back up. It's not a fucking Duracell that you put back in and you're good to go again. What this does is it just changes the meter. So this just tells you you're at 100% and you're going to start to act like you're fucking, back full of energy again, but you're actually down here with 20% left on your battery. So obviously, if you keep doing this every single day, what's going to happen is you're just never actually going to recover and you're just going to get more and more fatigued. Now, obviously, you're then going to rely on the caffeine more and you start to piece one and one together thinking, I feel the best. I have energy when I put caffeine in my body. And this is how the habit forms. So, if you've been drinking coffee for, 10, 20, even 30 years, then there's no stronger habit than this. There's no sort of mind link or like sort of neural connection from like A to B. It's as solidified in your mind that if I don't eat food, then I will die. It's as strong as that of if I don't drink caffeine, if I don't have my coffee this morning, I will feel absolutely exhausted. Now, your mind is actually right to think this because caffeine actually wears down the body every single day to a point where it actually blocks these receptors so much that your body then will start to create new receptors to the point where your body will just keep creating them until you've got this entire collection of adenosine receptors. And this is why you actually start to build up a tolerance. So let's say, in the first 3 months of drinking caffeine, you could probably, have one coffee and be bouncing off the walls. within, the first 1 to 2 years, this probably doesn't even hit the sides anymore. Like now you need 2 coffees. This is because your body has had its entire collection of adenosine receptors blocked by the caffeine. It's had to create new ones. And, your body is actually trying to tell you that you are tired, that you are fatigued and you need to rest. But what caffeine does is it just keeps blocking these receptors until it gets to a point where your body can't produce any more. Now, when you get to this point, this is probably after about 2 to 3 years of daily caffeine use. Now, this might not sound a lot, even if it's just 1 coffee a day, but that is every single day. I don't know any other drug that you would use every single day. Even drinking, most people don't drink every single day. It's maybe 2 or 3 times a week. Caffeine as a drug is by far the most used, most abused, popular drug on the planet. So when you get to a point where you're using something every single day, that is the strongest addiction you can form. So what this build-up actually does is it starts to form what's called drug reliance. And if you think of, again, someone who's on a hard drug, what happens when they come off it? They get what's called withdrawals. Now, withdrawals on caffeine might sound funny, but if you've ever had, 1 or 2 days off it and you felt absolutely fucking awful, if you got to, I'm sure you've got to 11 o'clock without a coffee and you just think, fucking hell, kill me now. And, as soon as you've had your fix, you're like, I'm back. That is because your body is literally in withdrawal the very next day. So if we break this down, how caffeine actually works, caffeine enters your bloodstream pretty soon after you drank it. Once it's, come into your system, we're talking within probably 45 minutes. And from this point, you have what's called a drug half-life. So every drug has a different half-life. Caffeine is about 5 to 6 hours. So what this means is it will take 5 to 6 hours for half of the amount you've consumed to pass through your body. So if you had your first coffee at 8 a.m. and it was a medium Starbucks, and let's say that's 150 milligrams, then if you add 6 hours onto that, which is 2 p.m., you will have 75 milligrams of caffeine left in the body. Now, you will not be able to sleep with 75 milligrams of coffee in the body. But after some time, your body will become so used to this medium Starbucks latte that you will no longer actually be able to get the kick, to get the buzz from just one of these. So obviously now you need to double up and go for 2. So what you're basically doing already is, just by having a little bit of caffeine, is you start to chase the high. And, after that first coffee, I don't think anyone can remember their first coffee, but, that feeling of just being absolutely peak stimulated, peak ready to go, this is what people are chasing. And after some time, as I said, your receptors have to build up the tolerance again, just because your body literally needs to sleep. So once you sort of double up the caffeine, now you've actually got the first coffee and the second coffee both working together. And this is the problem most people don't actually realize. So if you followed someone like Huberman or, some sort of health gurus over the past few years, they've probably said to, delay caffeine in the morning and then actually limit the time that you stop drinking caffeine.
Would you say cut off caffeine by what time of the day?
I would usually say take your typical bedtime and count back sort of somewhere between 10 to 8 hours is probably getting a little bit close, but take back sort of 10 hours or 8 hours of time. That's the time when you should really stop, using caffeine.
So for a lot of people, they sort of go with 1 p.m. sort of, as a hard cutoff. And they think that, right, as long as I've, stopped drinking caffeine by, 1 o'clock, then I've got 8 hours for it to pass through my system. But no one actually says how much coffee, can you drink in that time. And most people think that, it's just unlimited amounts. And as long as I cut it off by that point, I will be good. But if we actually look, I will lay it on the screen now. You can see here that if you add 1 coffee in the morning, and we'll just go with this, medium Starbucks as a general rule of thumb, then, you will actually be good. You will have the caffeine pass through the body and you'll be able to sleep by sort of early to mid-afternoon. Now, if you double this up, even if it's just, 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock, you're now fighting with, twice as much caffeine, it's not just about the time, it's about the actual amount in the body. If you then go to 3, 4, now 5 cups of coffee, but you're still cutting it off by 12 o'clock, you can see that the sleep time that you can actually, your body is able to pass this caffeine out of you, and the adenosine can actually start to let you know that you're tired and get to sleep. This, at 5 coffees, we're not even in the chart anymore. We've gone past fucking 5 a.m. So when you're getting to try to sleep at 10, 11 at night, and you're thinking, well, I cut coffee off by 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock noon, you've actually drank so much caffeine that the amount of half-lives for you to pass all of this caffeine is nowhere near even manageable. And this is why most people will actually feel like shit. Now, onto the topic of sleep. Most people think as long as they can fall asleep, that they actually don't get any negative side effects of caffeine with their sleep. But for most people, the problem isn't actually in falling asleep, because you can fall asleep if your body feels groggy, if it feels sort of, like just done with the day. The problem is that your body can't actually produce the hormones and neurochemicals that it needs, one being serotonin, one being oxytocin. These are major parts of, how your body gets to sleep and actually puts you into the stages of sleep. And the biggest one that gets hit is your deep sleep. So caffeine is probably the biggest cause of getting poor deep sleep. Now, again, if you've watched any sort of Huberman's kind of stuff, deep sleep is your most regenerative. This is where you actually restore your energy. And it's quite ironic, right, that drinking caffeine in the morning so you can have energy is the actual reason that last night you couldn't actually build up any energy because your deep sleep was fucked. And this is the constant daily cycle that, we go through every single day when we drink caffeine. And this is why you're always having to sort of chase the next high to try to get back to that sort of level you're at, because every day you're waking up fucking your sleep, which it doesn't even need to be said that sleep is the most important thing for your health and for your energy, that if you've got something so detrimental to it, that you absolutely shouldn't even be touching it. Whereas that's what's crazy, is like how societalized caffeine is, when it's literally a drug that does destroy sleep for nearly everyone. All right, so quitting caffeine could help my sleep. Cool. What else does it actually affect though in the body? Because you might be thinking, well, it actually, it helps me feel better, and, day to day, I actually enjoy my life more with caffeine than without it. So I don't mind taking, taking the hit with sleep. But there's actually a lot more that caffeine is sort of hurting in your body, that's sort of all contributing to this, state of unrest. So your body wants to be in what's called a parasympathetic state. This is what's known as like rest and digest. So your body wants to be in this state for probably 60 to 70% of the day. So obviously when you go to sleep, but also when you're eating, and just generally day to day, this is what keeps you from feeling sort of, anxious and nitty and just fucking stimmed out. What caffeine actually does is takes you out of this and puts you in the reverse, which is your fight or flight state, or a sympathetic state. And this pretty much is what caffeine gives you, what's known as caffeine jitters, or you sort of feel anxious. This is what meant that I was sort of slamming my knee on my desk, throughout every single day, because your body is in this constant fight or flight state. And this is something that's so crazy that you would take a drug that puts you in this sort of anxious, jittery state all the time, every single day. And it's quite sad because you've actually got no in between, because you can either drink caffeine or not. And if you drink caffeine, then you're going to feel your, energy come back, quote unquote, but now you're anxious and in this fight or flight. Or you don't drink caffeine and now you have to feel the withdrawal. And then if you actually think of, again, like what a drug addiction is, this might be the most fucking potent and sneaky drug addiction of all time, because you actually become as reliant on it day to day to do absolutely anything as a heavy drug user would to get their fix of whatever their drug was. So it's literally the same thing. And obviously no one wants to feel, anxious and jittery. So, you start to combat it with like extra supplements. And, there are some benefits of caffeine at the right time in life. Maybe you do need a little bit of a kick every now and again. But there's no drug in the world that you should be having even close to every single day. So I've gone for the past 2.5 years pretty much without caffeine. And I say pretty much because there's maybe been one day every 2 or 3 months where I might just need a little bit of green tea or something when I've literally had a really poor night's sleep and I need, to get through it. But this isn't anything like a reliance, because if I would have slept properly, if I would have, had proper rest, or, if you're just really ill and your body's run down, then sometimes your body, yeah, sure, it does need something if you've got a really busy day that you've just got no other option. But the problem is becoming reliant actually replaces and takes away your body's natural energy production, which is the whole point in the first place of the body, of being able to eat properly and go to sleep. Then you have caffeine, it basically counteracts it and basically says that no matter what you do, no matter how well you look after your body and, you get good 8 hours sleep, you are still going to need that coffee in the morning. And probably for most people, you're going to still need 3 or 4 cups every day. Otherwise, you won't be able to function. Now, if we go back to anxiety, the reason this happens is because when your body goes into this fight or flight state, it raises in your body what's called cortisol, which is basically just the hormone of stress. So for most people, they think that they don't actually want any stress in their life, which, I don't either. But for most people, they will, be pretty much in a stress state constantly throughout the day. And this is what causes anxiety. So when your cortisol is actually elevated, this will do things like raise your blood pressure. It will actually give you like heart palpitations. If you drink caffeine, you're literally in this state every single day. And this isn't good for the body. Like, I'm not sure exactly how caffeine affects specifically, but, stress kills. And, people speak about, right, if someone had a heart attack from work, they say, oh, it was the job, or it was, just too much on the plate. But no one actually looks at how much the caffeine is actually elevating the cortisol in everyone's body. And when you're literally getting to this point where you're slamming 5-6 cups of coffee per day, and maybe having, even a Red Bull in the afternoon, there's so much, demand on the body to put you in this fight or flight state constantly that I wouldn't be surprised if, caffeine is actually a bigger killer than most, jobs and sort of stressful situations. Now, sure, on its own, maybe caffeine can't do this, but, when you couple them together, this is why caffeine is actually pretty much, the silent killer. So how does this happen? Well, when caffeine blocks your adenosine, it also stimulates your adrenals, which your adrenal glands are what produces the cortisol. And over daily use, this actually, hindering down on your adrenals will actually fuck your entire adrenal system. So in your adrenals, this is what tells your body whether it needs to sort of regulate hormones. And caffeine actually blocks this. So there's, a certain hormones in your body controlled by what's called the HPA axis. Now, all you need to know is, this is part of your hormonal system, and caffeine is actually sort of blocking this and actually fucking up this system. So you've got, not just sleep, not just sort of, high anxiety and being, in a sort of anxious state and demand on your heart. You've actually got fucked up hormones as well from this. And this is a big part of what I don't see anyone in the health space, especially people who, quote unquote, call themselves like a stress coach and things like this. They're still slamming coffee. And if you actually want to look at the data, that coffee is, one of the biggest causes of, high cortisol. So, there's so much more to caffeine than people actually realize. And the hormones are just one part of this. It actually affects also things like your gut and even your metabolism. So if we look at the gut, that the big thing that caffeine does is releases a lot of stomach acid constantly around your body. So this is actually, quite bad for your gut health, and it's going to make your body have to work to sort of, get rid of this acid. And it will also put a lot of sort of motion in place to push food through your body. So when you actually have, time off caffeine, or when you wake up in this withdrawal state, your body's not actually able to process food properly. So you will also become reliant on caffeine to actually regulate your gut. And then with your metabolism and digestion, when you drink caffeine, this actually tricks your brain into thinking you genuinely are in danger when you go into this fight or flight state. And obviously, when you are in danger, your body's giving you everything it needs. And what's the most important thing is having sugar in your bloodstream. So your body will basically pull a load of sugar out of your cells into the bloodstream. And this is what causes, the caffeine crash. It's because you basically are actually getting not just a caffeine crash from your adenosine receptors, coming back and actually being able to put adenosine in your body. You're also going to get a mild sugar crash at the same time, because your body has to produce a shitload of insulin and process the sugar back out of it. So you will actually start to really hurt your digestion by having this constant sugar crashes. And again, this is what sort of gives you, the 3 p.m. crash. This is what stops you sort of being able to properly digest food, because for you to be in the rest and digest state, which is when you can actually metabolize and digest food properly, you don't want to be stressed at all. You want to be in the opposite state. Now, with the half-life of caffeine, this means that, it's going to take 2, 3, 4 half-lives for you to be completely out of this stress state. So if you drink caffeine up until 12 p.m., you're not going to be in a rest and digest state until, the next night or potentially tomorrow. And so this just means that obviously when you're chasing the high every day to get back to baseline the next morning, you're just staying in this, stress state every single day, meaning you can't properly digest food, that you're getting these, sugar dumps into your bloodstream, and you've got this stomach acid just constantly going around your body. So, with this digestion and the gut and the hormones, these are things that, nobody actually sees. So that's literally what's happening to your body every day that you drink caffeine. And if you think, again, that if you're taking something every single day, you are just becoming more and more reliant on this, and you're going to be getting more withdrawals. You're going to be in a worse state every single day. So without scaring you too much, what should you actually do instead? Well, watch this video here where I'm going to break down exactly what I did step by step every day to get off caffeine, what the changes I noticed were, and what the timeline is to get off it, and how this actually might be one of the best decisions you could ever make.